Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Outliers YouTube channel. And this is our show, Get to Know. I'm DP Lyle, and I'm here with my partner in crime,
Kathleen Antrim, and we've got another great interview for you today. You're so going to enjoy this one. We've gotten into a lot of trouble with this gentleman, and I believe he and I worked together in an anthology that Clive Cussler was the titular editor on.
That is true.
Yes, and it is with great pleasure that I introduce Tim Maleeny. Hey, Tim, how are you?
Great to see you. Great to see you, Kathy, and great to see you, Doug.
great to have you here. I have to confess that we've known Tim for a long time and have sat in a bar with him many times and have done talks with him and many times and et cetera, a lot of stuff. And I have to say he was an inspiration for me entering writing comedic thrillers. I had always wanted to do that, but I knew that writing comedy was hard. But then I said, if that idiot can do it, I can. So I said, well, why not give it a shot? And so Jake Longley was born.
So you were right on the you were right on the cusp of being gracious there, Doug. I was getting worried.
You were getting worried.
I was getting worried.
So what brought you to writing in the first place? I mean, how did this all happen?
Like any writer, especially I think mystery writers, I've been a reader first. As you can tell, I'm surrounded by books. I am the guy who, even when I was younger, always had a book in his hand. You're standing online, I'd pull the book out, and as I was going through high school and into my 20s, I found myself reading more and more and more crime fiction, and I just absolutely fell in love with the genre. And I think if you become that enamored of a thing, you start thinking about doing it yourself. And I was working in advertising. I was traveling a lot, going back and forth to client meetings. And after a while, a voice in my head said, if you're going to get serious about this, you need to start doing it. So on those airplanes, in between the meetings, I started writing short stories and literally just deconstructing stories I loved and books I loved, movies and TV shows, and teaching myself how to write. I didn't know about these things, craft fest and writing conferences and things like that. It's just, okay, put pen to paper and figure it out. And I started sending the stories in. And Lawrence Block, the great Lawrence Block, had written a couple of books about writing mysteries, Telling Lies for Fun and Profit, a couple of those. And one of his bits of advice with short stories was, and this is back in the day when you didn't hit send on an email, you actually sent in a short story, self-addressed stamped envelope, and if they didn't like it, they would send it back to you, maybe with a note, maybe not, right? And one of his bits of advice was, if you wrote a story and you've edited it and you really think you've gotten it right, and you send it out and it gets rejected, don't even look at it, send it out again and send it out again, and do that for a year, because he explained the odds of it getting published. And then keep writing more stories and just kind of play the odds. So I was scribbling these short stories, and I sent in one. It was called Death Do Us Part, and I got a call from the NWA, and they said, we'd like this short story to be the title story for this anthology we're putting together, and it's being edited by Harlan Coben. And I thought, oh my God, is this really happening? And that gave me the confidence not only to keep writing, and that ended up winning the Macavity actually for Best Story of the Year. But that whole time I'd been starting a novel. And that gave me the confidence to finish the novel, to put myself out there, and just to take this seriously. And that was like 15 years ago. So yeah, it's been great. And that's what got me into crime fiction. Really, I was inspired by doing it. I found I like having that in my head. I'm sure you feel the same way. Like, I'm probably easier to live with when I'm writing. And once I got into the novels, I got addicted.
So I have a question for you, because I'm, as Doug knows, I'm kind of doing my own study on this. It's anecdotal, but I have a question about your childhood. How do you think your childhood impacted your, deciding to become a writer, and the direction you took in writing?
Great question. I'll keep this one simple. I won't lay on the couch and get all, psychoanalytical on it.
Well, feel free.
But I was lucky, actually, and it's an interesting question for me because there are a couple of contrasts. My parents were readers, and they were amazing. I was very, very blessed and kind of won the lottery on the parents. So I grew up surrounded by books, and they grew up in the 30s and 40s, and so we had all the pulp adventures. In fact, somewhere behind me, there's this great collection of the Edgar Rice Burroughs stories,
Yeah.
as well as the Greek mythology and history. They read everything, and I grew up surrounded by those paperbacks. And every time we moved, I remember my dad, my brother, and I would build new bookshelves to put the paperbacks up. So at a very young age, reading was important. I saw people doing that. I wanted to do that. Anything I could reach on the shelf, I was allowed to read, pretty much. So depending on the subject matter, as I got bigger, I got more voracious in my reading. But then when I was getting serious about going to school, when I was older, both my parents had science backgrounds. My mom was in medicine and my dad was a chemist. So when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do when I grew up, the conversation was, okay, well, I kind of like writing, and they were saying, okay, is it a doctor, lawyer, or scientist, or what kind of scientist do you think you're? Because you have a trade, you'd have a trade, and then you write. And the notion that you might, be a writer or work for Marvel Comics and draw superheroes for Stan Lee didn't occur to anybody. And now, of course, you watch a movie, you can watch all the behind the scenes of that movie, and you realize, wait, that guy does nothing but draw dragons. That's his actual job. That person does, set design. So I went on to college, and sure enough, took every science course there is known to man, and then went to business school, still trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And it was only when I was in business and I had writing as an outlet that I realized that was something I wanted to do. And I think because books and stories, and I was reading a lot of science fiction and fantasy when I was younger, which I think is fairly common. If you read at that middle grade to YA age, it has such an impact on you. I think you kind of want to tell stories yourself when you get older. And for me anyway, that was the case. So yeah, it's always been with me, but it was surrounded by those pulp paperbacks. That's what got me into writing, I guess.
You mentioned
Were you a shy?
And I remember when I was a kid, the first real book that I read, I don't mean YA stuff they'd call it now, where the guy wins the football game and gets the girl in the end, those stupid little stories. I read a few of those, but I read Journey to the Center of the Earth, Jules Verne's, and it blew me away. And then I stumbled on Edgar Rice Burroughs, the Pellucidar series.
Yeah.
I devoured it. Because it was so imaginative and so well done. And so I think you're right. If you start at that age and you read a lot, and I started reading then and never stopped, you do at that point in time say, I want to do this. I want to create that story. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
And were you a shy kid, or were you an outgoing kid, or did you kind of live in your books?
Sort of in the middle, because I did sports.
Okay.
I did do sports, so I had friends on the teams, and my parents were very much of the sound mind, sound body sort of generation. So it was get out there and play ball, and so I ran, I swam, I played soccer, and so I had friends, and I was social in that sense, but I wasn't I would say just the social kid. I was sort of someone in between, because I was definitely a bit of a geek. I was definitely somebody who was nerded out by the things he was reading, and we're also kind of a cinephile family. So always loved movies as well. So that balance was always kind of there for me, actually.
Do you have an all-time favorite book?
No, that's an unfair question.
No, as writers, I know that's almost impossible to answer. You're right.
It is. It's almost, I think for big readers, almost possible to answer. I definitely have a soft spot for those books, like Doug was just saying, that I distinctly remember reading. And some books I've gone back, and I'm not usually a big rereader, but I have done that with some books. Some books that you read at a pivotal time, like the Burroughs books and Jules Verne and things like that. You think, okay, that was pivotal, Tolkien, just because the impact, and it's a story that stayed with you, as opposed to, I love that at the moment, and I love that while I was reading it, but now I'm on to the next thing, kind of thing.
Very, very cool.
What writers inspire you? I mean, who do you look at and say, that I learned a lot by reading that particular individual? Yeah,
it's interesting, because when I got into crime fiction, I had picked up, I can't even remember, I was jumping around a bit. And I think I'd picked up one of my parents' books, and I'd read that. And then I got curious about the genre because it's so different, right, from adventure stories and fantasy and science fiction. And then I went back and I read Chandler and I read Hammett, and Ross MacDonald and Ross Thomas actually had huge impacts on me. Ross MacDonald, just because I think, you know, in that Chandler tradition, the writing was so clean, the stories were so compact, but the voice was so distinct. And even as the thing got dark and at times hopeless and took these turns, you found yourself really enjoying it and smiling because of the wit, the social commentary and the undercurrent of it. And then I discovered people like Elmore Leonard, who for me was a huge inspiration as a writer. Because if you look at Elmore Leonard, then you look at somebody who's more contemporary, like a Robert Crace, interweaving a pretty dramatic story with that irreverent voice, either of the PI or the other characters, and getting that light and dark together. Donald Westlake, Lauren Esselman, who I think gets overlooked sometimes as a crime writer. He's been celebrated as a mystery writer as well as a Western writer, but his stuff, like Leonard's, just feels simultaneously real and somehow dark and fun at the same time. And that voice, when I started writing short stories, I realized that was coming out unconsciously, and it was harder to find people who wrote with that mix or that blend than I would have expected. Because, as you know, a lot of crime fiction, which is I think brilliant, tends to stay in a certain tone, a tenor of it. It can be cozy, it can be, you know, very, very, very dark. And I was gravitating to things. If you look at, you know, a Guy Ritchie film, things that were a little more heist, a little more capers, where, yeah, the subject matter is serious, and yes, you're absolutely rooting for a certain outcome, but things can go horribly wrong and often sideways, because let's face it, most criminals are not rocket scientists, and people make mistakes.
And there's built-in humor there.
Yeah, exactly. And I always talk about
writing humor. I mean, that's a real challenge. It's very difficult.
It is, you know, but then again, if Doug and I can do it, how hard can it be?
Exactly.
I think, you know.
You know what? I happen to know you two. You're both brilliant. So.
Well, I don't think humor is, how do I say this? When you're writing it, it's not, it's funny as a reader because there's a release of tension. But if you think about, you know, Lucille Ball and the Chocolate Factory, there's nothing funny about that to Lucy, but we're laughing our asses off, right? And I think the best humor, if you look at the best sitcoms, the movies that pull this off, it's deadly serious for the characters, but something so shocking or unexpected happens. And often the way certain characters will deal with imminent threat or tension or pressure, in the way they talk or the way they act or the way they react. It's either giving release to what we're bottling up inside as a reader, or it's funny unto itself. You know, I think if you listen to the way people actually talk, the back and forth between people who can speak shorthand to each other is often hilarious to the person listening, even if they're arguing about something, or even if they're, you know, trying to get away from a bank heist.
So true. And I mean, and Doug, you share that, you know, that same love. You guys, I mean, you're able to write humor as well. I mean, I have tried my hand at it and have to say, you know, don't try this on your own and at home. It'd be very dangerous.
It brings up a question I want to ask. I get asked that a lot, and people say, how come you seem to find a quirky, humorous thing in everything? And I said, well, everything's funny, actually. Everything's funny. And I said, I guess it's just the way you look at things. And do you find that just anyone could write humor, like, you know, Kathy was saying, no, or do you have to look at the world through a kind of a humorous eye, kind of looking at it side glancing and saying, you know, that was funny. I mean, you know, the guy died, but it was funny. You know? Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think, you know, I think you have to find your voice, and I think that the writers who succeed and really pull the readers in ultimately are you know, writing in their natural voice. And I think it is the people. I mean, think about Carl Hyacin, right? His stuff is absolutely hilarious. The Irish writer Declan Burke has written a couple of books that are right there with Elmore Leonard and are brilliantly funny. I think you have to have that slightly jaundiced eye and yeah, you look at the world in a slightly perverse way, maybe, or you see the humor and the irony in it, right? An English writer once told me that he felt that a lot of American writers didn't appreciate irony, or didn't that's the constant American Brit debate. And I think if you have that kind of ironic look at things and see that with all best intentions things could go horribly wrong, then you're having fun with it. And again, the characters may not be. It's funny because I did an event on the West Coast for my latest book a few weeks back, and I was doing it with another writer, and he had heard that some of the reviews, and this book was described as being hilarious and very funny and everything else. But he just started reading it when we did the event, and he just read the first chapter, and he said that was terrifying. He said, I don't know why people are saying this book is funny, and I think that's why it's hard to, Doug, you do the same thing with the Jake Longley series brilliantly. Are these comedic thrillers? What do you call them? Because they're not. There are some light, cozy books that are brilliant, that are, you're smiling from the first chapter, you're smiling right to the end, and it's got that rom-com feel that is wonderful, and it's very satisfying. That's not really what I'm writing. In my mind, I'm writing pretty serious stories about serious subject with characters intent on maybe achieving an outcome with very, very conflicting agendas. But the way I look at the world is probably a little upside down, and I just kind of let that out.
That's back to Elmore Leonard. I mean, I can read his books and there's laugh out loud things, but the characters are dead serious.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then he told me that once. He said, Hollywood doesn't get me. He said they think that we have these lines in these movies that they make, and they want people around them to laugh at what they're saying. He said these characters aren't funny to themselves.
No, it's deadpan.
Exactly.
Yeah,
But the audience is laughing. Yeah.
Yeah. No, you read the Raylan stories, or I mean, even Get Shorty, the characters are deadly serious about that. And I think it gets back to having a voice. Some writers are more comfortable with description, other with dialogue. I find the folks who do humor naturally, where it just comes out, are more comfortable, or work harder maybe at the dialogue portion, because a lot comes out in the way people talk, and the impulsiveness or the restlessness or the unpredictability of a certain character that can send things spinning. And I find that that's always been more natural for me. I definitely hear the voices and channel that a bit, and then next thing you know, I'm laughing at it, but I didn't start that chapter thinking it was going to be funny.
I mean, in fact, for me, the hardest part of writing is what I call stage directions. What are people doing while they're talking?
Exactly.
The talking's easy. I love that.
Yeah.
I can sit out and write dialogue all day long. But what's happening in between? And I'll end up have 2 pages of just dialogue, and I'll say, well, wait a minute, I know who's talking, but they don't. And these people aren't doing anything. I gotta go add something, and then I can't think of anything for them to do.
Yeah, because you don't just want talking heads. I mean, you've got to, for sure.
Exactly.
So Tim,
and I think, Kathy, I think something else just on that you mentioned earlier that I think is interesting is, it almost goes back to getting started in short stories. I think of every chapter very much almost as a story unto itself, beginning, middle, and end. And if you're writing certain types of thrillers or capers or heists, there's always characters or circumstances that are, it's a classic rule of, make it harder. You love your characters, but treat them like dirt. So make it harder than it needs to be, maybe on some of the characters. So for me, every time I'm writing a scene, I think, what could go wrong? So that's maybe where the humor comes from. And I'm not trying to do it to get humor in there, but sometimes the things that could go wrong are shockingly unexpected or remarkably stupid, and then you find yourself laughing a little bit, and then you have to pick up the pieces, and that's where the what happens next and the sense of surprise. If I'm not surprised, I don't think the reader's going to be surprised. So that for me, the page turning part of it is maybe interlinked with the humor, because that's tied to the unexpected twists and the disasters.
Oh,
sure. An outliner or more a pantser?
Say what?
Are you an outliner or more a pantser?
Yeah, we talked about this. I'm more of a pantser. I write organically from. I obsess about the opening, and I think about what happened, almost the locked room mystery, and I must rewrite that opening chapter 40, 50 times. And then once things are set in motion, I just write. But I will, about 100 pages in, stop and do a retroactive outline to map out in a way the patterns and the appearances of the characters, because I write usually third person close. So for me, getting a sense of, okay, have I seen this person recently or not? Am I getting the rhythm right? And once I get that melody down, I can make it through, the next 2/3 of it. The first third is always a bit of a jigsaw puzzle. So I will map it out after the fact, and then I'll keep a log of like first sentence, last sentence of every single chapter as I go, so I can refresh that as I get deeper in the book. But I don't outline to begin with. I often wish I did. I'm always jealous of my friends who do, and I've just never been able to think about the stories that way. They have to unfold for me.
It's more fun to just throw them in the mix and see where it goes. That's what I do.
It's true.
I used
True.
to outline, but not anymore. It's too much fun to write without a net. You can always fix it
Maybe
later.
that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So Tim, tell us about your latest book.
My latest book, which I have here, is called Hanging the Devil.
You mean
There you go.
this one?
Blatant self-promotion. And
Yeah, no,
look at
we're helping
that.
you with that. See, check it out. We're helping you with
My
that.
gosh, this is a high-tech operation.
That's right.
So it's called Hanging the Devil. There are some characters that if you've read some of my other books, you will have seen before. But the first thing I learned when I started writing mysteries and did go to writing conferences and met other writers. In fact, I got this advice from Lee Child: write every book like it's a standalone, because you never know when someone's going to discover you. And I heard that on average, people discover writer 4 or 5 books into a series. So this book is an art heist in some respects, and it started that way, but it expanded into something much, much bigger. It opens with a robbery at the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco,
Oh, cool.
which is, it's a really, really cool building with an incredible collection. And it's located directly across from City Hall in San Francisco.
Okay.
So being in the heart of the city, and given some of the things that happened to the city and the current state of it, as a setting and as an opening, it was really interesting. And back to that kind of noir tradition of social commentary and texture of what does the city feel like when you go there. And not to give too much away, because this happens in the opening chapter, there's an attempt to rob the museum and break into it using a helicopter, and things go horribly, horribly wrong. And a security guard is killed, and the only witness is an 11-year-old girl, which is his niece. And she's in the country illegally. She was smuggled out of Hong Kong during the protests, and she sees the men who broke into the museum and flees and runs into San Francisco's Chinatown, and basically hides in the back alleys of San Francisco's Chinatown. And the story begins with that. And she's discovered by one of my recurring characters, a woman named Sally Mae, who has a very unusual childhood. She lives in Chinatown now. She runs a school, a martial arts school, but as a child, she was orphaned and sold to and raised by the triads to basically become an assassin. And she left that life behind. Now she lives in San Francisco. She's partnered with a private investigator named Kate Weathers. And she's kind of decided that she's the self-defined protector of Chinatown. As long as she's there, she's going to look after people. And she discovers this young girl, and then hears her story and decides that that's the next case they're going to take. And she has to convince her partner, Kate, that this is a good idea. And the young girl has all of 50 cents to her name. So they split it 25 cents each, and they decide to look into what was happening at the museum and what happens next. And what was cool about this story for me as it unfolded, I had to research a lot about art and art smuggling and art forgeries. And one thing they discovered pretty quickly, again, without really giving anything away, is that they weren't trying to take things out of the museum. They were trying to smuggle forgeries in. And that
Oh, wow.
leads to a really interesting look at what happens in the underground art world, where a lot of priceless art is used and sometimes copied, sometimes stolen, but used as collateral by organized crime to do all sorts of deals around drugs, weapons, human trafficking, you name it. And the book jumps back and forth between San Francisco and mainland China, a city called Dafen, which is where a lot of art factories exist, where they create a lot of oil paintings. If people want a copy of a Rembrandt or something like that, to buy at a museum store, or those are created in this city at scale, and also in Hong Kong. So it's an interesting story because it becomes kind of an international thriller, but it starts as more of a local heist, and that's kind of how the story begins.
I will be buying that one tonight.
Yes.
I'm going to get that on my Kindle tonight. Absolutely. That's going to be great to read. Absolutely. I'm so looking forward to that. Well, Tim, it's been fantastic to have you. You are a great interview. We're going to have you back.
Anytime.
Outliers. We're really excited to see your class. I think you and Doug are doing that one together on writing humor.
We are doing on humor.
And I
August the
will be
6th.
in the audience.
August the 6th, we're talking about humor in writing.
Yeah.
It'll be fun.
I will not be missing that one. That's for sure. So thank you so much, Tim. And, this is Kathleen Antrim and Doug Lyle signing off. Please press that like button and subscribe. Helps us keep this channel on the air and bring you a lot more great interviews. Until next time.
And Tim, I'll see you in Nashville.
Perfect. Looking forward to it.
We will have fun in August. Yes. All right. Take care, my friend.
Thank you. Have a great night.
You too.